We have a great country, we have a great people, but they have to have a sovereign government. And every child should know how to take the coin out of his pocket and put it up to the mirror and see the heart of it, sort of. I'm sure everybody has it on it. It's 12 strings, 14 strings on the money that earns life. And do all of it. It's not me doing it. Every child has the same intellect. Every child is born sovereign. And that's his inheritance. 4 elements, earth, air, fire, and water. His intellect and reason. Every child in the world is born sovereign. And the 5 senses. And that's 9 strings. That's what the Queen has up in her coat of arms. She claims Dia Imondra, that she's equal to God. But we have the Sovereign Trinity, which is that's what we acknowledge. And that's the difference. But what a wonderful history we have. And we really have a wonder that children can understand. You're never alone, no matter what part of the world you're in. And it makes life interesting. You learn how things grow. You learn about rivers. You learn about the sun, the moon. The planet Earth is dark. And as I said, look, the sun died. Look, it's all comes. Look at it there, look at light and shade, turning it. You see it there. But that's all man had, for planet Earth.
It's just that there's so many children and so many people in Ireland are not aware of the significance of this. And I think as council, as Irish people, we should be made very much aware.
Well, as I said today earlier, asked, when was America's Independence Day? It was, and you asked, when is Ireland's Independence Day?
I know, it's never celebrated.
And it was, oh no. And why should we feel shameful?
American Independence Day is celebrated on radio and television in Ireland every year.
I asked RT to announce
Irish independence.
I asked RT to do it, to come and
so have I.
And they didn't do it. They won't even mention it. But that's not right.
No, it isn't. It's censored.
Yeah.
Censorship.
I'd like to ask Lord Mayor, next year it would be possible to have the ceremony in the round room?
Yeah, first of all, this is the room that's of significance.
You can't have this ceremony in the round room. That's politics. This is the sovereignty. You must understand the state was founded here. That's the Dáil Éireann was founded here, but it's handed over to the politicians in the round room at 3 for 3/3. I can't go in and do this in the round room. I can't go to Leinster House and do it because it's the Oireachtas, which is in 1922 imposed in Ireland by King George V and the British government. And their allegiance would be to that. Our allegiance is to the 1916 proclamation. That's your allegiance, that's the foundation document of the state. And Bunrock na Héireann, if you have any difficulties, you go, that's what the courts are supposed to uphold, is Bunrock na Héireann. And maybe I didn't say it to you, but if you go, that's the sovereign seal. It has to have Eire on it, donates the 32 county election of 1918. And then you just go into it. Article 4, the name of the state is Eire. And we're talking about the state. And this was written in, I said, between 1917 and 1999. It was ratified with the 1916 and the 32 county election of 1918. And Article 5, Ireland is a sovereign, independent, democratic state. And the question you ask your politicians is, where are you getting your sovereignty from? Is it from the 1916 proclamation and from here? Or is it from 1922, King George V and his successors? That's the question. And when you go to court, you see the sovereign seal over the court. There are 13 strings since 1922, and the Irish Republic would rather have changed them. You ask the judge, what Bunrock na Héireann are you using? And ask him, what is that sovereign seal with Eire on it? He has to, it's your courts. All these things, you have a sovereign right. The first thing that I mentioned here today was the right and welfare of the sovereign citizens. You have a sovereign right to own your house, your land, education, hospital care. All these, they're your right. That's why we are a sovereign. We had to be republicans. Cromwell was the first republic in Ireland. We had no choice in it. But we have to be sovereign republicans. That we have to have a sovereign government who's for the sovereign citizens only, not for vested interests or corporations or that.
Billy, can you just talk a bit about your family's role in Vaughan's Hotel?
Well, there were no proper structures set up for 1916, the proclamation. And you see the provision of government. And when Lord Mayor read the proclamation, he said a sovereign state. And we bought Vaughan's Hotel in 1917 to implement the 1916 proclamation and right from Bunrock na Héireann. In other words, to set up exactly in verbatim was defined in the 1916 proclamation. Nobody can change that. That's what sovereign and indefeasible means. But that can be changed by a sovereign vote of the sovereign citizens, a 32-county sovereign vote. That's why the changes that were made in 1922 up in the Shelburne Hotel in the Constitution Room, they're not legal, valid, or bona fides. They never went back to the sovereign citizens for ratification, and then they go back to Dáil Éireann, and Dáil Éireann ratifies it. So the ones in 1937, the Valera's one, those changes are not legal, valid, because they're only 26 county changes. And that's what we bought for to tell. And today is the 93rd anniversary of the War of Independence as well. It was from Salah Beg. John Hassett is here to tell us all about Salah Beg. John does it tomorrow.
Yeah. Sorry. Yes, Salah Beg happened at noon, about noon, on this day, 93 years ago. Sean Tracy, Dan Breen, and other local volunteers challenged the race of the British Empire as policemen, members of the Royal Irish Constabulary, were conveying Gaelic night to the local party. They called on the policemen to surrender. They refused to do an exchange of fire took place, and the two policemen were marked fatally wounded. It was later that all gathered. Actually, the cabinet were in assembly at around the time that the Salah Beg ambush took place. Salah Beg is about 3.5 miles from Tipperary town, on a road leading from Tipperary town to Nina. The hue and cry, of course, and the sensation of the policemen being killed became widespread, but nevertheless, the people supported the Irish volunteers. They were also members of the Irish Republican Brotherhood, all members in the Salah Beg ambush, and so they had a writ of two bodies. Well, they certainly had one for the IRB. Richard Mulcahy wasn't at all, General Richard Mulcahy wasn't at all too happy with the Irish volunteers being linked. But the next event that happened was one of the Salah Beg volunteers was captured, a man called Sean Hogan, by the police, and Dan Breen and Sean Tracy. Dan Breen, by the way, was a member of Dáil Éireann for 37 years afterwards. Sean Tracy and Dan Breen planned a rescue attempt because prisoners were being brought out by rail from Tipperary to Cork Jail normally, and were able to come to the conclusion that this had happened with Hogan, that he'd be transferred by rail, that he was before policemen. So at a little station now closed called Knocklow, the volunteers held up the train, and again an exchange of fire took place, but Sean Hogan was rescued. 2 policemen were killed, and in a short time the War of Independence in Tipperary was growing, and like every movement they needed a coat or a banner, and a man called Padraig Brennock, summing up after the Knocklow rescue and another event in the month of June when the district inspector was killed in Thurles, he wrote, "At Salah Beg the war began, and next was heard the song of the rescue of Sean Hogan at the station of Knocklow. Hunted Bully fell raised his day in Thurles town. It broke the heart of Peter for miles the country round." So that was more or less it, and of course the Royal Irish Constabulary were the police of the time under British government. Thankfully, for a long time now, since the people who sat around this table, we have our own police force, the Garda Síochána. And so I also want to take this opportunity to talk here. I'm thanking you very much for facilitating us all, and also contributing your own part of history, which is important, of the Mansion House and the first Dáil Éireann. But tomorrow at 3 o'clock in Salah Beg, we will be commemorating the first ambush of the War of Independence, and we have Jack Roach speaking there, a historian and a man well versed in Irish culture. And any of you who are free you're most welcome to come down, because